Hello, and welcome to Attract, Prepare, Retain, the 2020 OSEP National Summit on Improving Effective Personnel for Children with Disabilities. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items to cover that will guide you on how to interact with today's presentation. Today's presentation is broadcasted live, and all attendees will be muted for the duration of this event. Make sure that your computer speakers are not muted and the volume is turned up. To share your thoughts, comments, and observations on the content of the summit, please use the event's chat box located to the right of the main screen. If you do not see the chat box, please click the chat button on your Intrado control panel. If you would like to ask a question to presenters or event moderators during the summit, simply type your question in the Q&A panel located to the right of the main screen. To access the closed captioning for this event, please click the CC button on your Intrado control panel. Should you lose audio or video at any time, please refresh your browser. If you need further technical assistance, you can enter your question in the Q&A panel. At the conclusion of today's presentation, a brief evaluation survey will appear. Please make sure to complete the survey and provide us with feedback on the content of today's presentation. Now let's get started.
Hello, I'm Lori Vanderploeg, the Director of the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you for joining us. We were scheduled to have this summit last March, but as you all know, our lives changed suddenly. Although we wish we could have this event in person, the silver lining is this issue is one that impacts us all, and having a virtual event allows us to share this information more broadly. Over the next 3 days, we will explore how we can improve our collective ability to attract, prepare, and retain effective personnel to serve children with disabilities. We have invited experts from other fields to share their expertise in each of these areas, a panel of practitioners in education and related fields to share their perspectives and experiences, and a special educator to summarize the research, lessons learned, and leverage points for moving forward. Our focus this week is to explore innovative and creative possibilities, to challenge the status quo, and to empower each of us to reconceptualize how we attract, prepare, and retain effective personnel. I have been a lifelong educator, and during my past 2 years at the U.S. Department of Education, my primary focus has been on improving our ability to attract, prepare, and retain effective personnel for children with disabilities. This is the most critical issue for me, and as we all work towards improving outcomes for children with disabilities, there's not a more important leverage point than ensuring that each child has a positive relationship with an effective teacher or provider. And our collective focus should be on supporting the practices and systems that make a reality for every child. I've had the pleasure of talking with many of our presenters over the past week, and I think you'll find, as I have, both an inspiration and a call to action from the remarks they will share with us today. Today, our presentations will begin with an expert on the professional chef. Tomorrow, we'll have an expert from nursing. And on Thursday, we'll have an expert who has studied retention policies of successful companies. All 3 of these experts have important lessons to share regarding the changes experienced within their fields that may be useful as we look for innovative paths within education. Our hope in this event is not seen as a culminating one of our work to date, but rather an infusion of thought and possibility into the ongoing discussions and work being done by organizations, training institutions, schools, and individuals all over the country. Please help us disseminate this information to others to enhance and push forward the current discussions and efforts with your colleagues and in your communities. All 3 events posted at osepideasthatwork.org will be next week. At that site, you will also find a new resource page on Attract, Prepare, and Retain that brings together federal resources, state efforts, and resources from related organizations that you may find useful in your own efforts. Today's focus will be on attracting effective personnel for children with disabilities. Just to set the context, there are over 3.7 million teachers in the US. About 300,000 of them leave the profession each year. According to NCES, the average age of teachers in the US is 42. From 2010 to 2018, enrollment in teacher preparation programs dropped by a third. In August and September, over the last several years, news reports and articles have echoed the struggles of school districts across the country to fill teaching positions as the school year begins. This most recent back-to-school season exacerbated that struggle as many additional teachers chose not to return to teaching due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many states and organizations are engaged in media campaigns and other efforts to attract and incentivize teachers. The OSEP-funded Cedar Center has several very helpful tools and resource briefs examining the teacher shortage, providing states and districts with strategies to both fill immediate vacancies and offer alternative certification options. The state of Michigan held a series of focus groups as part of their Educator Workforce Summit, involving more than 100 special educators and culminated in recommendations to state policymakers. Texas offered a dozen grants to establish district-level grow your own programs. Oklahoma has offered a special education boot camp as an alternative pathway to certification for career changers and teachers in other disciplines. However, we must do more. We reconceptualize how we attract potential teachers to the profession, both those initially seeking career options and those exploring career changes. We have many talented young people in high school who may not be thinking about teaching as a career, who would make excellent teachers. How can we pique interest early? How can we encourage current teachers to find one to mentor and encourage to pursue teaching? How can school guidance counselors promote teaching as a potential career choice? And how can we support teacher clubs and early experiences to highlight the thrill of teaching a child to read? College preparation for teachers needs to be more attainable and affordable. We need to better support potential teachers in submitting their applications, pursuing the success of college, and providing loan forgiveness incentives for teachers who teach in high needs areas. Effective veteran teachers who move or take break from the classroom should have an easy pathway to return. Certification, recertification of veteran teachers should not be a roadblock if they want to return to the classroom. We also need to be more creative about certification pathways for both those in the education field that want to become certified teachers and those with expertise and experience in other fields that want to come to the classroom for the first time. Yes, we need to find a way to increase teacher salaries, but we also need to consider some of the innovative ways to incentivize teachers to consider, pursue, and enter the profession. Perhaps the most important step we need to take is a national recognition and media campaign that celebrates the critical importance and impact of teachers. What other profession so intimately impacts our collective future? Thank you for joining us today, and now it's time to explore some innovative solutions. I'd like to encourage you all to pose questions and engage with each other through the chat function. I'd like to welcome our first presenter, Ann Mcbride. Ann is the Deputy Director of the Torabera Mediterranean Center, a joint project of the University of Barcelona and the Culinary Institute of America. She's authored 7 books and regularly writes on topics related to professional and experimental cooking for both academic and consumer audiences, and is a frequent presenter and moderator at academic and professional conferences around the world. Anne will share with us lessons learned over the past decade of the changing role and status of the professional chef. Thanks for joining us, Anne.
Good morning. I am Anne Mcbride, Deputy Director of the Torrebara Mediterranean Center. I hold a PhD in food studies and conducted my research on the changing role of the chef in the 21st century, which is what I will be talking about. Namely, how has professional cooking turned into a desirable career path when it used to be somewhat of a last resort aspiration, something you did when you could not really do anything else. This was clear even 20 years ago when Anthony Bourdain published Kitchen Confidential. Cooking, as described in that memoir, was not exactly something one might have wanted for their kids. Tellingly, perhaps, the generation of chefs who came of age in the early 2000s and caused the explosion I'll talk about today often went to college for something else, pushed by their parents to get a real education, and then turned to cooking. Whereas now parents embrace culinary education right out of the bat a lot more easily. So long gone is the time when being a chef meant only cooking food for others. Chefs today must speak knowledgeably about sustainability, nutrition, policy, public health, labor laws, or culture. They have communications directors and social media managers. They perform at wine and food festivals. They fly all over the world to cook collaborative dinners at friends' restaurants. They write cookbooks and memoirs, etc., etc. They collaborate with scientists, designers, artists, inventors to develop new tools, techniques, and dishes. They put their names on kitchen equipment and apron, but also on sneakers and clothing collections. They have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, and the media covers their every move. Today, there are more than 1 million restaurant locations in this country, with about half of them being independent small businesses. One phenomenon we've observed the last 5 years or so is young chefs opening outside of major US cities and in the process contributing to creating lively food scenes and job opportunities everywhere around the country. Many young chefs make their names in cities like New York, but then pick Asheville or St. Louis when time comes to open their own restaurant. The expansion of local food systems with chefs working more directly with farmers has also made this possible. And diners everywhere have embraced creatively ambitious restaurants. This expansion of the culinary world means that a plethora of food-related jobs are available now that did not exist before, and in many more places also. You don't have to be in LA, Chicago, or New York to make a living working in food. For example, public relations or other communication firms that specialize in restaurants, food TV agent, or cookbook ghostwriters are all new jobs. This great expansion has allowed people who wanted to work around the professional culinary world, but not directly in a restaurant kitchen, to do so. When tired of the restaurant life, cooks can shift to jobs still in that sphere that might give them more work-life balance, for example. Or instead of working for minimum wage in a 3 Michelin star restaurants, they can become chefs at a chef at a tech company, since those often offer lavish food perks to their employees. And the chefs get to have their benefits and also to have their weekends, holidays, etc. All these things you do not get when you're working in a restaurant. So all of this has attracted a much greater and diverse talent pool to culinary schools and to the kitchen, with career options that allow them to work pretty much anywhere in the country. These demands, opportunities, and attention happen in all markets for chefs in all sorts of operation. They are, however, particularly intense for chefs who have reached the top of their industry, whether locally or internationally, and the recognition that comes with that. A category of chefs who tend to be educated, often highly so, good storytellers, connected to their peers all over the world, and with extensive, not to say excessive, media attention. One thing to keep in mind is that this very mediatized side of the culinary world tends to still be predominantly white and male. That has changed recently too, with more attention to businesses owned by chefs of colors, for example, and publications giving their restaurant critics a mandate to expand their horizons. And a large number of cooks work in places like cafeterias, fast casual operations, or hospitals where they are not followed by glamour or much attention, but might have benefits and steadier schedules. Food and restaurant jobs have historically provided a way for newcomers to the US or people with few other options, a way to make a living. So while most of what I'm talking about is focused more on chef owners of independent restaurants, I would be remiss to not mention the people who often stay in the shadow. So this image of the chef as an independent business owner who gets lots of media attention and opportunities contributes much to the changing appeal of the profession and to drawing young people to culinary school and to climbing the kitchen ladder. The fame aspect is not negligible, of course, and I can't tell you the number of culinary school applications I've seen where the goal was to, why do you want to go to culinary school? To become as famous as XYZ, to be the next so-and-so. But also beyond that, there's this great number of opportunities that cooking afford. I often tell young people looking to get in the profession that that's the one thing you can do anywhere in the world, even if you don't speak the language. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown a wrench in the picture, with restaurants and other food service operations being tremendously impacted and leaving millions of culinary professionals unemployed. It is too soon to tell what this will mean for the future of the industry as a whole, which is typically resilient, and it rebounded well after the Great Recession, for example. There were 16% more restaurants in 2018 than in 2008. What we're immediately seeing, however, is that the restaurants and food service operations doing their best are the most nimble one, the ones that have been creative with their offering, such as opening markets within their restaurants or shipping their products nationwide, and who have used the power of their social media reach to also get support from their communities. And there seems to be a wave of innovation coming from young, less capitalized chefs who might very well shift the traditional top-down influence model that we've seen so far. The chef is the one overall in charge of the kitchen from an organizational and creative perspective. In 1976, the American Culinary Federation successfully managed to elevate, in its own words, the position of executive chef from service status to the professional category in the US Department of Labor's Dictionary of Official Titles, which was then reflected in the 1980 census for the first time. The creative element and that the special recognition of a certain type of establishments in the US Department of Labor's ruling, for example, sets apart chefs who are uniquely original in what they do, who create rather than recreate dishes. Until the 1970s, only a handful of chefs, such as Carême and Escoffier in France, had become world famous. In the 1970s, the activities of chefs began expanding beyond the stove at a never-before-seen scale, to the point that Newsweek put Paul Bocuse on its cover in 1975, calling him the most visible, the most influential, and possibly the best chef in the world. The time period is unquestionably significant and marks a clear shift in the profession. I characterize three distinct periods in the evolution of the role of the chef as entrepreneur, the chef as entertainer, and the chef as expert. The first category, the chef as entrepreneur, ranges from the 1970s to the 1990s. The first noticeable change that happens then and opens the path for its 21st century incarnation began in France around Nouvelle Cuisine. So beyond the creative culinary developments, what we really see is chefs becoming chef owners rather than employees of restaurateurs. And suddenly the chef is no longer hidden in the kitchen, but gets to be the public face of the restaurant also as they're walking the dining room and talking to diners. The second category, chef as entertainer, ranges from the 1990s to the 2000s. When the Food Network launches in 1993 in the United States, the chef steps further into the limelight. It's no longer enough to be in the dining room or in media articles being talked about. Chefs must now perform their cooking in front of a camera, explaining to an audience who does not possess their knowledge and skills how to do what they do. The launch of Bravo's Top Chef in 2006 is another significant moment in that rise. And then we get to the chef as expert. In this third and current phase, which started in the mid-2000s, the chef becomes an expert through the power they have acquired in the previous two stages. The chef is required to be out of the kitchen and in front of the public. As the potential of the culinary profession is fully unlocked, the role of entertainer can leave chefs unfulfilled, especially since many food television personalities in 2020 do not have any professional training and as such are not part of the networks mentioned above, the professional networks. Chefs as experts have acquired technical and creative skills, knowledge, public attention, and media recognition. That would have been enough in the era of the chef as entrepreneur. But in the current era, it is not, and chefs want more because they know more and they have more to share. They want to talk about sustainability or chemistry, for example, both because media and public ask them to do so, but also because it gives them something new to learn. The chef as entrepreneur learned business skills, the chef as entertainer learned media skills, and the chef as expert has to learn about a wide range of issues because the public looks to chefs as trusted knowledge diffusers, whether rightly or wrongly, of course. This era of expertise is also one that gives great social power to chefs, and they like to use it for good. For example, by creating initiatives to reduce food waste, provide greater and more just food access in their communities, or feed people after natural disasters. Throughout these changes, organizations have emerged that help chefs become more educated about the issues they need to talk about and support them, if you want, in a sort of continuing education model. Because of course, there's a huge risk when you're asked to talk expertly about something if you don't have the right knowledge to support these expectations. And you could risk disseminate wrong information when you're being asked to be a thought leader in your profession. So these organizations that support chefs range from industry leadership conferences at the Culinary Institute of America to the UN Sustainable Development Goal Advocacy Hub Chefs Manifesto to the James Beard Foundation's Boot Camp for Policy and Change. These organizations and others help chefs better understand policy and also train them on how to talk to their elected officials, to CEOs, et cetera, to help them affect change. By obtaining a particular training, chefs become a member of a class of professionals. By publishing a cookbook or memoir, they are not only metaphorically feeding the public, they imprint themselves in history and offer a permanent record of their work, one that can be consulted by others, which is also something that helps attract people to cooking, because you get to know chefs and you get to know a lot more about cooking before you even start, just by reading all of the books that are being published these days and that are being published by chefs rather than by an intermediary like a journalist. And by cooking in a way that attracts the attention of a certain type of judging authorities, chefs enter a sphere of exclusive influence. By presenting at and even organizing conferences of their own, they also further categorize what they do and who they are as a professional with a point of view to share. And all of that, of course, becomes even more highlighted through their social media platform, where they can talk without intermediaries, again, to each other and also, very importantly, to their public. So the increased role of the chef is directly connected to their increased visibility and the expansion of their domains of expertise. Creativity and innovation are valued above almost all else, which understandably is particularly appealing to young people looking to make their marks on the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Now I would like to introduce the panelists. Dan Brown is the Director of National Engagement for the EdTech Evidence Exchange. Dana Edwards is the Director of the Office of Human Resources and Development for Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. And Roy Jones is Executive Director of the Call Me Mr. program and Provost Distinguished Professor in Clemson's College of Education. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Laurie. I'm delighted to be part of the summit, and I'm really keen to talk about grow your own solutions, a very solution sort of oriented approach to a really tough, persistent challenge about recruiting special education teachers, educators, attracting educators that are going to be durable and built to last. I think a really, really key thing to bear in mind as we think about the labor market that we're trying to tap, as we think about where to find the talent, how to attract it, is that teaching is a very, very local workforce pipeline. Most people don't move far away from home anyway, but teachers are even less geographically mobile overall than other professionals. According to Michelle Reininger out of Stanford, more than 60% of teachers teach within 20 miles of where they went to high school. So if you walk into just about any school in the country, most teachers are from the area. They're homegrown, whether or not there's any kind of intentional interventions or programs or supports. Local people are ending up in the classroom educating the next generation of citizens from that community. So since that's the case, and since we've been scrambling about persistent shortages, particularly here we're talking about special education, it makes sense to be intentional to start attracting and skilling up and developing and cultivating and nurturing that local talent early. Otherwise, they're going to be stumbling in later, underskilled, underprepared, underqualified in many respects. So let's start early. So what does that look like? We know from ACT data that if you wait until the end of high school and you ask students, are you going to become a teacher? Are you interested to become a teacher? If they haven't been part of any program, the answer is probably going to be no, for lots of reasons we can speculate about. We need lots and lots of young people to fall in love with teaching, and it's not happening by default with the status quo. So we got to get to them before they finish high school. But the good news is that teaching is very lovable. And when there are interventions, when there are grow your own programs that reach students pre-college, they are inclined to fall in love with teaching because teaching is great. And NEA research shows that the #1 reason that people join teaching, the #1 reason they stay in teaching, this is from the American Public School Teacher, Past, Present, Future, where they survey the workforce every 5 years. It stayed the same for decades, #1 reason, and that's to work with young people. That's the best part of teaching. So even though young people are going to be rained down on with discouragement, in many cases from teachers, from people in their family, if they show an interest in teaching, the armor that they need to say, no, I want to become a teacher, I want to become a good teacher, I want to become a teacher in our community, the armor comes from cultivating actual hands-on experience, the clinical piece, which research shows is the most valuable piece of teacher prep anyway. Getting high school students an opportunity to actually teach is essential for grow your own teaching. And if we want them to become special education teachers, they need to have those moments of connection and discovery, the best part, the working with young people in special education opportunities. So kind of like junior student teaching opportunities. In many cases, what this looks like are teaching academies, career pathway programs, in high school that are co-curricular, integrated into the school day, where they are learning under the wing of a great teacher leader. And that teacher leader that's tapping them, that's recruiting them to try out this program, and that's then teaching them the ropes of a kind of foundations of education style program that they're doing in high school, in many cases getting early college credit, very similar to other career tech programs, but focused on the teaching profession. Is really, really key. And that teacher leader, if you recruit them from the special education teaching workforce, and you get someone who wants to be a great ambassador, who has that passion and knowledge and skills about special education, young people are going to be inspired by that. And that's what I've seen when I ran Educators Rising for 4+ years, national network of high school-based programs exploring teaching, that's the case, is that when you tap a teacher leader who's a special educator, boom, young people in that program get inspired, get interested in exploring special education themselves. Now, there's a whole array of incentives and providing a kind of continuous path where they can see a clear, affordable route to finishing college and then having a high-paying, stable job afterwards, and laying that full foundation in front of them is really, really important. So having that continuous pipeline, but it's got to start in high school.
Well, thank you, Dan, for sharing that information. And by the way, I went into teaching because I was very interested in working with young people with disabilities. So you hit the nail on the head with that one. So I have a follow-up question for you. What are some of the top barriers to a successful Grow Your Own program?
An important thing to note, this is a really key question, Laurie, that in terms of barriers, an entire ecosystem of career academy programs for all kinds of workforce sectors has sprouted over the last number of decades and has done really well in the last 15 years, but not teaching. Teaching has really struggled. And the Future Teachers of America was once as big as Future Farmers of America, FFA, but it was disbanded in the 60s and wasn't really reconstituted for decades. So we have some catching up to do. And the way the high school ecosystem, is set up now doesn't really, it's kind of a square peg in a round hole to get these programs to work. So it really requires getting CTE folks on board who previously have not had this program in their zero-sum Perkins pie. So that can be an interesting conversation. It requires getting, and so that's at the district and the state level. It requires getting the teacher quality folks on board at the district and state level, since they are thinking day in, day out about, building a sustainable, highly skilled teaching workforce. And then at the local level, it really requires getting an exceptionally good teacher leader to be stewarding the program day in, day out. Someone with special education experience, if special ed is going to be a priority for the Grow Your Own program, so that they can be that kind of like personal model that when young people tell their story about why I became a special educator, they can point exactly to that person at their school that was running the Grow Your Own program and nurtured them and inspired them and mentored them.
Great. So you talked about who are some of the essential folks that should be at the table. How do you encourage them to participate in your Grow Your Own program? How do you encourage them to want to help with this project?
Well, there was a really fascinating report out of the state of Georgia about 4 years ago called the Georgia Teacher Dropout Crisis that showed that, and I think this is the case across the country, that most teachers are not encouraging young people to go into teaching right now, but a minority are. And that's who we have to get. Educators that are fired up to pay forward their knowledge, their skills, their passion for the profession, and they're looking for leadership opportunities without leaving the classroom. They're passionate about teaching, and they want to find a way to lead without leaving. So principals know who these teachers are. I mean, they can tell in their school who is really skilled and starting to get a bit restless and looking for that leadership opportunity. And by putting the opportunity out there, I think they'll be able to see relatively quickly who could have those skills. The fires are burning in an important population of teachers that really want to lead these programs. And they're incredibly inspiring. They get to work every day with young people who really want to be there, who want to become teachers, who want to learn, who want to work with young people. And then they form kind of local internship partnerships where they do it. And it's really, really fun.
Great. Well, thank you, Dan. I wish we had more people like you out there helping to develop these models for us. So thank you for sharing with us. So Dana, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I am Dana Edwards. I work in the Office of Human Resources and Development in Montgomery County Public Schools. And over the last 4 years, I've been on a wonderful journey in looking at how to attract, recruit, select, and hire special education candidates specifically for the needs of the students within Montgomery County, as well as our families. One of the things that we all know is that special education, whether it be the educator, the teaching assistants or paraeducators, the substitute teachers, and the service providers are such a critically distinct field, and the needs of these teachers are just extensive across the nation. So what we do in terms of really being strategic and understanding what the scope of that work looks like is going to be critical for the success of the students as we produce them to be able to go into society and be successful. Like Montgomery County Public Schools, and I'm sure like in all districts, the continuum of services that are offered for special education students go from the very least restrictive to where we have our students where we service them from birth through 21 years old. We have 5 distinct schools within our school system that are for severe, profound disabilities. And we also focus on students who are certificated as well as diploma bound. And so when I think about the recruitment, not only that happens internally within our system, but holistically overall, it's important first to know what are the services that are needed by students. And because our continuum is so wide, we know that as an Office of Human Resources, we cannot do that work by ourselves. So from the very beginning of our process, we embrace it from the standpoint of being highly collaborative. We are collaborative with our partners in special education, understanding the needs of the programs, understanding where programs may expand and where there may be needs for teachers. When we think about the student interns that come into our system, we work very distinctly and very collaboratively with the special education partners to be able to pair our student interns where we know that we have teachers that will be able to show them the information that they need, because the end result is we want those student interns to then come and work for us. All of our special education partners, as well as our principals and special education teachers, and then those lead teachers in our buildings who focus on special ed, are part of the interviewing process. It's important that when we're looking for employees who have a special skill set to be able to support students with disabilities, that we have people who are either directly doing the work or who are experienced in the content area. What we found with that is that the candidates have an affinity to be able to interact and or speak with them or see someone who is in the realm of the work that they want to do. Over time, we've noticed, especially that, especially for our special ed teachers who have the dual certification, that some of them start to wander away from special education and focus on the content area more than the actual specificity of special ed. And in order to really help navigate that, we want candidates to be able to see themselves in future positions within our system. And that's why we put certain candidates in front of certain interviewers to be able to support that. In addition to that, we really focus on how do we get candidates in the very beginning when we're meeting them and talking about our system to make a decision if they'd like to go into the field of special ed, and we only hire them in that particular content area. We have them definitely talk to people who do that particular work, and we very publicly and very notably talk about the different programs that we do have to offer. Our hiring goals are specifically important every year in looking at how do we hire special education teachers as early as now in October of this year for September of next year, so that they're contracted early with us. And we're looking for people with distinct backgrounds and really discrete programs to be able to support our students who may have more severe needs than other students. It's our goal to be able to definitely look at how we engage people on the forefront and keep them engaged in the programs that we have to offer in Montgomery County, and we do that in a collaborative way. Similar to what Dan said, looking at a grow your own perspective, our grow your own, Dan focused on the students within the system, and that's our next layer in which we're looking at. But our grow your own focuses on how do we diversify our workforce and really looking at who are our instructional assistants and or paraeducators to really be able to build out teacher certification programs so that the people who work with our special education students now, they understand the programs, they understand the expectations, are able to get their licensure and that direct training while still remaining an employee, still maintaining their benefits and still maintaining their pay, and be able to move into a teacher position. We currently have 3 teacher preparation programs, and that was so important to be able to look at how we build teacher preparation programs for special education, and think about the different programs that need to be offered to meet the ever-growing and changing needs of our students and families. And so we wanted to be able to keep up where we see the progression moving in terms of the needs of students and the needs of families. And the teacher preparation programs have been key, not only in terms of how we recruit our staff into those programs and really sinking into people who have done instructional aid work, but also in terms of making sure that they are successful in terms of completing interviews and then giving them the support once they are hired through a mentor teacher that is dedicated directly to first-year teachers who have special ed background and who can really focus in terms of the success, so that the time we invest in the beginning, which is so critical and everyone focuses on that, that there's a retention piece on the end. We want to keep our special educators within our system. As we know, special education is a wonderful commodity and everyone wants a great special educator. When you invest the time to be able to attract and to train them, how do we make sure that they do remain within our system? And then the last piece really to build out is when we have employees who are dual certified, how are we really thinking about, if you're not teaching in the realm of special education, how do we get to navigate you into that direction and remember why you did that? So we host events for our internal employees, approximately 100 teachers who are not using their special education certification as a special educator, and reminding them of the wonders of special ed, how much that their knowledge is valued, and what it will do in making a difference for children should they bring themselves into really working with our special education students. And so that has been critical in terms of thinking about not only external recruitment, but also internal recruitment. And once someone says, yes, we want to be a special educator, we also consider how we induct them and how we onboard them into our system to make sure that their first experience is a lasting experience and they're working in tandem with a mentor who has that background, and that's critically important as well.
Oh, thank you, Dana, for all of that great information. You know, a few things that you had said that really resonated with me was that you really focused your recruitment practices on making sure that it meets the needs of the services of the children within your system. So that's a wonderful statement for you to have made. And then the second area is making sure that you are working on diversifying your workforce. And so when you talk a little bit about your Grow Your Own program, can you speak a little bit more to how you're working with your paraprofessionals that are in your special education programs and encouraging them to consider this as a career focus?
This was a big focus for our system, as when we looked at our teaching workforce, we definitely want to make sure, we know the research said that children, especially children of color, Black and brown students, tend to be highly more successful if they see educators who look like them and they can forecast themselves into the future. When we looked at our core of our employee groups, our supporting services professionals are our most diverse group of individuals based on their race and ethnicity. And so we wanted to tap into the expertise, and what we found was not only with our paraprofessionals, but also with other individuals who are supporting services employees. They may have been teachers or have completed their bachelor's and really creating programs that were meant for them. We also have a program that is an associate's degree program that feeds into a bachelor's degree program because we wanted to meet our employees where they are. We did extensive research about the best teacher prep programs within our area to be able to offer diverse opportunities, whether it be online, whether it be in person, as well as taught by current MCPS employees to create the comfort and conditions. But I think the biggest component, the biggest barrier that we saw when we were doing this investigation is that if I want to become a teacher and I am currently a bus driver, I have to leave my job, stop getting a paycheck in order to do my internship. And we did not want to create a barrier for people seeking that next level of professional growth, and that would give our students the teacher that could really be the catalyst for change in their life.
Great. Wonderful response. Thank you very much, Dana, for sharing with us. So next is Roy.
Well, thank you, and hello. I was indeed impressed with comments by both Dana and Dan. They were certainly speaking my language when it comes to growing your own. We have, as executive director of the Call Me Mr. program in South Carolina, have a 20-year history with growing our own teachers in this state that were initially primarily and still after 20 years focused on elementary level education as teachers in middle grades. And I believe strongly, Dan mentioned that teaching is a local profession, and he gave some data that reinforced that. And of course, Dana was exceptional in her presentation about what they're doing in Montgomery with special ed. But there's never been a time that is more urgent for attracting teachers of color in the profession. And we, though when we addressed the topic in South Carolina, the issue in South Carolina, we were addressing a shortage of Black male teachers teaching at the elementary level. I don't have the specific data points, but I think it's generally well understood, and certainly Dana would know this, that there are far more students of color in special ed than there are in gifted and talented programs. And that demographic is not shrinking, it's growing. And coupled with some of the research he also mentioned regarding the effectiveness of a teacher of color that reflects the demographic of the student population that they teach is certainly something that a point that cannot be overemphasized, as our nation, as we see, is increasingly Black and brown across the board. In South Carolina, it's 1/3 African-American population, with over 40%, close to 50% of our students in as students of color, specifically Black students, with a growing population of Latinx students. So it is imperative that professionally we increase and develop the number of fully certified career teachers of color that can address this population, and specifically, even more specifically, that would be able to move into areas of special education. It is a dire need that cannot be overemphasized and stated. And what we have done with our students, commonly known as Misters within the Call Me Mr. program, is that we are a supplement to the teacher prep program, in that we develop leaders and we create a co-curricular activity or framework that develops these young men that come from the local communities that we find. In fact, 95% of our Misters come from South Carolina communities in South Carolina K-12 schools. And even more impressively, after 20 years, 85% of them are still in the classroom, with some 12 to 13% that are principals, assistant principals, leaders of teacher education programs at colleges, and certainly well involved at central office level, even in public education. So there's a secret sauce to this, in that we realize that the development work is important, and that we have to start, as was mentioned in the earlier presentation. Dan pointed out that it starts in the schools. It starts really early on, because we have to close the college admission gap, and we have to close the mandatory testing gap, and that must start at the K-12 level, with strong advising as well as test preparation, and also pulling in parents to be part of the process, because they're significant, as we well know, with developing and filling out the FAFSA forms and really supporting the children that are in their charge. And that goes with extended families as well. So it's so addressing the pipeline and addressing it as a community of stakeholders, including the schools, the colleges, as well as the nonprofit community organizations, civic organizations, as well as certainly our elected officials, must be all engaged in this process. I pointed out because when we started 20 years ago, we started with 4 institutions, Clemson University and 3 Black HBCUs, Black colleges and universities. We are now in 25 institutions, including Clemson, in South Carolina. So it's been a statewide effort. It includes all of the HBCUs with accredited teacher prep programs, as well as HWCUs that have been traditionally white, that have had trouble attracting Black teachers and teachers of color. So it's a statewide effort, a statewide commitment at the highest level that involves both funding at the state level as well as funding sources that are corporate and foundational. But it's all hands on deck, and it's a recognition that we are faced with a growing critical issue in education specifically, that has vast implications for our nation. And especially as we've seen the landscape nationwide, we certainly understand that there is should be a commitment, a national policy that ensures that as many of our young people get and have an effective teacher in front of them coming through their school experience. So this is and I thank the summit for focusing on this, and certainly feel that it is important enough for it to be a national conversation.
Thank you, Roy. That again was very great information. So I have a little bit of a follow-up question, but first of all, I'd like to just compliment you on your work around trying to increase and develop, an effective workforce of color. And we know the need for that. So congratulations to you. And on that note, I hear that you are celebrating your 20th year. And other states have adopted your model. So what advice do you have to give to expand upon your program that we know that can make a difference? So I'm referring to your Call Me Mr. program. So how could you encourage others to expand upon that program?
Excellent. Thank you for that question, Lori. Yeah, we're very proud of that. I think the success in South Carolina and the expansion work in South Carolina from 4 institutions to 25, we have a majority of programs that have accredited teacher education programs that are in fact partnered with Clemson University as a Call Me Mr. program. That message and model has resonated, as you suggested, in other states. We're now in 10 other states and 10 institutions within those states, both large and small institutions, as well as HBCUs. So it first is a recognition that it's important to recognize that diversifying the teacher prep pipeline is important. Important because all students need to have an effective teacher. Clearly, over 80% of teachers in our country are white, and we're rapidly becoming a 50% of our total population are students of color. And so if you don't begin to align racially and culturally and bilingually with students that are clearly representing a growing demographic, then we're going to miss the boat, miss the mark, and create all kinds of other social, economic, and racial conflicts. So that's what the motivation is. And certainly our teacher prep programs have not kept up. So we have to begin with first a champion, because that's how we began. You have to have a higher ed champion, and you have to have a teacher prep champion that says, we want to make this change and make this adjustment, coupled with the GYO, the Grow Your Own, that pulls in a school district that is part of that stakeholder. After all, that's where our teacher prep candidates come from, and that's ultimately where they're going to go back and serve. And so we see that triad as important. The teacher prep, the college, university, the local school district, and it's tied in with our program, and we've been able to make a tremendous triad. We have models of that throughout South Carolina. In fact, 4 or 5 within our state of its triad, involving also 2-year colleges as well as 4-year colleges, that make this sort of a smooth transition. So starting with that champion, starting with that, that institution that wants to step up and pull in the kind of coalition and collaboration, as Dana mentioned, is so critical. Collaboration, this is not work you can do by yourself. We cannot operate in isolation. It really recognition that every stakeholder has an important role to play in having a formula that can pull the roles together. Because that's what we have found, is that the pieces have existed in a number of places. They just haven't figured out how to coalesce, how to work with each other. Right. That folks that work in the same hallway in many places didn't know what each of them were doing, but both of them hold an important piece that can contribute to the development. And of course, on a state level, you have to have, I believe, policy at the state level that supports it. One of the things that Dana said, I thought jumped right off the page, is that you have a bus driver that wants to move up, or a substitute teacher that wants to move up to become a career certified teacher. But they can't just eliminate their paycheck. They can't just not get cut off income. They have to have a way in which they can pursue that education, pursue that certification, at the same time not starve and maintain their family. That's a policy issue. Those are adjustments that can be made at various levels that allows the flexibility for a system to adapt to the need. And often systems are just slow to move. So we look for innovation. We look for areas and places where we see that movement. Dan and I met in Texas, and since that meeting in Texas on the Grow Your Own Summit, Summer Institute. Since then, we are now licensed in both Houston and Dallas in Texas, with 2 institutions there, and the University of Houston in Houston and University of North Texas in Dallas, all within that, in 2 years since our presentation there. So it's clear, and for them, for us, it was mind blowing, because we couldn't understand why they needed us. We're just South Carolina. Their cities are larger than our whole state, but it's the pieces. It's the pieces, that the formula that they just needed clarity on, and our program was the linchpin to that, and we're very proud of that. And so we're able to evolve and develop throughout the system, throughout the country, with establishing models of that we believe are triad models and grow your own models around the development of diversifying the teacher workforce.
Well, thank you for your passion and certainly your commitment to your program. It sounds like you're doing wonderful work out there. One message that came through loud and clear from all 3 of you before we get into answering a few more questions was really around the importance of collaboration and ensuring that we had the right people at the table, that we're the champions and we're willing to help commit to this work. So again, thank you, Roy. And at this time, I would like to ask Dan and Dana to rejoin us so we can continue to have a collaborative conversation around the importance of attracting effective personnel into our workforce. So again, thank you all for your comments that you gave just a few minutes ago. One theme that I thought resonated throughout all of your conversations was around collaboration and the importance of collaboration, not only with internal stakeholders within your systems, but certainly external stakeholders. For example, the IHEs, and other areas. So when we look at the importance of that, I want to pick on Dan first. Dan, talk to us a little bit around some of the collaborative efforts that you have, or put you on the spot a little bit about how you actually lever maybe some career changers. So how do you collaborate with people that are out there in a different workforce that are maybe wanting to leave their profession and seek something else? So how do we encourage them to consider certification as a profession? So Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Okay. Happy to talk about this, Laurie, and I would love to build on what my colleagues have shared here. I think Ms. Edwards' example about the bus driver is kind of like perfect to put an image there. You have someone who's working, can't afford to miss work, and wants to change careers. So I can't emphasize enough how much I agree with Dr. Jones's point about this is a policy solution. I mean, we have the money in our country to support someone to become an educator, a public servant, but we've lacked the political will to make that kind of investment. So it becomes really, really, really hard for the individual. And then it leaves local systems to try to piece together something to support that transition. But we lose so many people if we took more cues internationally about how folks fund education, as opposed to defunding these kind of pipelines. So for one thing, and I hate the phrase "throw money at the problem," because there's no reluctance to invest in lots of other sectors, and here we do need more investment. We need more financial support for people that want to change careers, that can close gaps, that can be excellent educators for our students who need them. So if someone wants to be a teacher, that's a big commitment. They're going against the tide of there's a lot in culture that disrespects teachers, so they're making a bold choice to withstand a lot of that pressure and that sort of current, to go for it. And teaching is a profession. It's not like you can just tag into this job. You have to be highly skilled and well prepared. You have to tap into a codified body of knowledge and skills, and you need time to practice, and you need that clinical experience, and you can't just zip into it. So there needs to be a coherent, well-supported journey, financially supported and preparation supported. That's an awkward phrase, but someone should see the coherent path. And there are a number of like New York City has a really good program for paraprofessionals to be able to transition into teaching. There are step-up programs around the country. The University of Colorado, Denver has great models, but these are isolated. They're not scaling up, and I'm glad we're able to talk about this at the National Summit, because it's a beginning to put these on the radar, because the talent is out there, and we need to make it not backbreaking or impossible for people to take that journey.
Great. Dana, Roy, anything you would like to add?
I think just to expand on what Dan said, teaching is still a noble profession. Regardless of what new jobs come up because of the technology, regardless of our current context of what we're in, I think we are all starting to see ourselves as teachers. And it's critically important. And it's good, hard work that pays off for the future, but it cannot be done in isolation. And it's really, the critical component is, if we don't hold hands and do it together through the lens of what's best for children, and to think about the missing components of where we do have diverse teachers, whether it be race, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be gender, whether it be sexual orientation or sexual identity, we have to be critically keen on what we're looking for. And so as we start to recruit and really focus on how we do that, many of us are doing similar things, but it looks different in different places. But really being attentive to how do we find that next best teacher, because the teacher preparation programs are decreasing in size. And so many of our teachers are our hidden gems that are in places that we don't often think of. And recruitment is a 24-hour, 365-day approach, regardless of where you are. So between the program that Roy has established at not only Clemson, but in many universities, as well as in Dan's program, that speaks to that collaborative component of working with who you have, but considering how to get what who you want. But the needs of our students beyond learning needs, but their direct social emotional needs, we've got to continue to determine how we find educators that are going to be able to support that. And it's not always going to come from our colleges and universities.
Right. All right. So just a follow-up question regarding this. Where do you see the responsibility of recruiting the teachers lies? Where does that responsibility lie? And some of you had spoken to that, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more. Who needs to be at the table to really help with this work?
One of the real problems, and I know we all have a perspective on this one, but one of the real problems is that the experience that many of our children and youth have in school has not been the most appealing way in which that leads them to becoming a teacher. Some of the worst enemies or detriments of the pathway to become teachers have been teachers themselves. I can't tell you how many times I've heard educators be discouraging to our children about going into the profession, wanting to see them go into other pathways. And I can't think of a more detrimental, damaging message that could be out there, when in fact, as was mentioned, teaching is meritorious. It's commendable. It's something that should be highly. I mean, when I grew up, it was it. I mean, being a teacher had status. It had cachet. I mean, you were a big deal, and you better not cross a teacher. Somewhere along that line, and as generations have grown, we've lost that, and it's been hard to get it back. But that's when we had collaboration, because you had the parent on the same page, you had the minister on the same page, you had the community on the same page, you had the teachers on the same page, and we're actually trying to get that back. Where we have missing links, we're trying to compensate for the missing links. Where we, kind of educators are trying to compensate for lack of parent involvement. Parents are blaming the teachers for being for not being fair to their children. There's so many dynamics. The question becomes, how do you get a message to especially children of color, prospective students of color, that education and become a teacher is one of the best things best decisions you could ever or possibly make? Then you complicate it by the fact that we desperately need special ed teachers. And Black males, for example, are most subjugated to special ed, and we have so few that are desiring, coming out of high school, to wanting to be raising their hand saying, I want to be a fifth grade special ed teacher. So there is a marketing image issue that's involved, and we lose so many students in the pipeline, which is why you got to drill down a lot earlier in the pipeline to make it a longitudinal effort to ensure that we have the teachers we need by the time they come out of school and into college. And that's really part of it. And there's so many pieces that have to work well. To get into teaching, we know what it takes. I mean, Alabama, Texas, South Carolina all have their teacher, the qualifications to even getting into the major. And that starts even before they get into college. So if I know I can exempt the praxis by scoring 22, 24 on the ACT, then why aren't we prepping our students to become teachers scoring at the 24 level on ACT or higher, 1100, 1200 on the SAT? They don't have to deal with praxis. Yet I have, one of my biggest hurdles is getting many of our students past praxis core, and that shouldn't be. So now once they get past that hurdle and get into the college courses, they seem to be doing much better. The outcomes are better. So there's got to be a link between the IHE in the school districts to figure out that. And we got dual credits, we got dual opportunities. We even have investment, in counselors that work through that at the with the high school and school counselors. But again, I don't see the collaboration has to be made stronger when you're talking about creating journeys and pathways for kids coming out of school into a teacher ed program. And I don't even go, we don't even have time to talk about alternative certifications. I mean, that's a conversation in itself. And so that's the challenge.
Yeah. Well, you heard a little bit earlier today from Anne from the Chefs Association talking a little bit about changing the perception. So how do you think that we can improve, change the perception of the teaching profession? I know that not only within the U.S. Department of Education, but certainly OSEP, our goal is to elevate the profession. So we've got to elevate our profession. And the only way we can elevate the profession is to change the perception of what teaching is all about and the benefits of becoming a teacher. So I'd like you to speak to how we can change the perception of teachers.
It's a great question. I'm happy to take a quick opening salvo at that one.
Go for it, Dan.
This is obviously a really, really tough one. And there are models in other professions. I thought Anne's remarks were fascinating to hear about the sort of upward trajectory of the profession, the professional journey of chefs gaining status and money and capital in the culture. So with teaching, there's no shortage of other kind of successful professions to look at. And the chefs is a new one for me. I was fascinated to learn about it. There's been a lot of work done in education trying to emulate the Flexner report, which was put out by the American Medical Association, I believe in 1910. So we're now like 110 years out from codifying the modern medical school. Because think about like pre-1900, being a doctor was not prestigious. It was, there were quacks with medical bags and there were people who'd gone to Harvard and they were all being called doctor, just like gigantic variants. So Flexner really put the clamp down on what it took, and they shuttered a lot of preparation programs and set a very, very high continuous standard that the profession really adopted. So now, I mean, a century later, when someone's a doctor, you're like, wow, what's implied is you went through a lot to do that. Your preparation is solid. I'm going to defer to you and trust you. Of course, there's plenty of bad doctors out there, but on the whole, the idea is that this is a trustworthy process. So teacher preparation is obviously, well, it's totally decentralized. Every institution is in many ways its own kind of fiefdom, which makes programs like Call Me Mr. really valuable because they replicate across sites. Programs like You Teach, they replicate across sites and they're high quality. That's really, really important. So having a real solid bar for entry into the profession can increase the respect. Also, when someone is in the profession, you have something like board certification. This has been successful in medicine, and it has been successful in education with National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, but it's only reached 3% of educators. But building a portfolio to demonstrate accomplished practice should be the goal and should be incentivized through policy across the board. So there are structures in place. There's all the knowledge there. We have all of, other countries look to America for innovation in education. We just don't scale it across everything. So I think that if we look at high bar for teacher prep, and then a solid standard of demonstrating accomplished practice as an expectation for all practitioners, and incentivizing and compensating that appropriately, that would dramatically elevate the prestige and you'd have more people wanting to come in, and that would have cascading effects.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time, but I'd like to hear from each of you just very quickly. What is one thing that we could do to try and improve our ability to attract effective personnel into the teaching profession? One thing that we could do to improve.
So I will start with this one. And just to go back to, I'm going to bring a little other component in on what Dan said to really almost gloss the teaching profession again. As a former teacher, and then connecting back to the comments of our speaker and working at a culinary institution and doing recruitment there, and you think recruiting teachers is interesting, recruiting chefs and pastry chefs is also interesting as well. But I think our current context of where we're living now in terms of where learning had to turn into a virtual stance has given an opportunity for everyone to see what teaching is and what teaching is not, and to really kind of lay a new lens on what this means to children and the importance of it for the future. Thinking about what's important in terms of recruitment for teachers, I think one of the biggest things is that we have to be flexible, because the traditional model of what and who a teacher is no longer there anymore. I think Roy spoke about that so in so much detail around what the teaching profession meant at one time, and it was the profession. There were schools that were dedicated specifically, that were teacher colleges, and we no longer have that. But the flexibility and understanding that we have to look at people with a different lens to understand that there might be a teacher there, we need to make them a teacher. And how we collaborate and build real structures and programs around how we do that from the onset, and how we get them interested in pouring into the value and education of kids, and kids who need it over time, whether it be special education students, because we need to create equity in terms of the instruction that they receive, whether it be Black and Brown students, where we need to give them more equity as well in terms of who they receive the instruction and how that instruction is received, and then all of our students in terms of just the level and detail of that, but that it is not isolated to a school district. It goes into higher ed, it goes into our communities. It is everybody's responsibility to be able to really find and create that teacher that's going to be the change agent for our children.
Great. Great.
That point can't be overemphasized, and that, in a word, to me, is changing the perception, is changing the perception of a profile that seems to be one of the issues, that there's only a certain profile that would make for a good teacher. So many times young people don't get encouraged by a counselor or another teacher coming out of school that, hey, you would make a great third grade teacher or eighth grade teacher, because they don't fit the profile. So though it may sound like I may not agree with Dan, but we have to be careful with the bar, because part of the way in which the bar has been interpreted is one of meritocracy and equality, what's the other word? Measuring quality in ways that are quantitative, that you represent it because of your scores and your, honors programs, and you just have to be careful, because we have so many of our very successful teachers that don't come anywhere near looking like they would have been or would have become a teacher back in high school, or even early college. And so we're really sensitive to how we project and who we are careful about excluding out of the profession, because development is, if you have a development model, you can in fact realize that you can pull out attributes and virtues in many of these young men that have genius within them that would make for great teachers. So part of it is, again, not being so dismissive of young people because they don't look like the teacher you think are great teachers. And social media, projecting, I think it was mentioned, Dana mentioned about this virtual reality we're in, but looking at, how in fact young people communicate and being able to adapt, our messaging to the way they hear and communicate. Don't think that I'm a great fan, but I do understand how you got to be able to communicate to young people to get to them. And that's part of the challenge too.
Good. Dan, you only have just a couple of quick seconds left.
Sure.
So if you'd like to end our message with.
Yeah. And I think that clarification by Dr. Jones is so important about being really inclusive. And it's part of the reason why I'm a big supporter of educator micro-credentials that are competency-based and equitably constructed so people can show what they know that's directly applicable, as opposed to an SAT test that may be problematic. But I just have one last thing, and because it's virtual, no one can throw tomatoes at me. But I think all of the international systems that we are chasing and that don't have to have conversations about attracting special ed teachers because they've got it resolved, all of those systems are 100% unionized. And the one thing I think we could do is empower the profession, as opposed to looking at individual incendiary moments where a union did something that someone doesn't like. I think empowering labor and empowering the profession to drive policy is a crucial systemic step towards making the profession more attractive and sustainable for future generations.
Great. Well, great job, you guys. Roy, Dan, Dana, thank you for your expertise. Lots of key words came to mind listening to you. We need champions. We need great mentors. We need to be strong communicators. We need to be very collaborative, making sure we've got the right people at the table. And you are leading the way. So thank you for everything that you're doing to help us continue to elevate our profession, change the perception, and hopefully attract more persons into the field of education. So thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our panel for sharing their perspectives and that wonderful discussion. Now I want to introduce our final speaker. Lisa Dieker is a Pegasus professor and Lockheed Martin eminent scholar at the University of Central Florida. Her research focuses on harnessing the power of teachers, working across disciplines in inclusive settings in teacher education, special education, and simulation. She's led and managed more than $20 million in grant funding. Lisa?
Thank you, Lori, for that introduction. And I also must thank Renee Bradley for your tireless effort in putting these panels together. So I want to start today by having the chance to reflect on the great comments made by Dana, Dan, and Roy. And so I wanted to just start by sharing with you a little bit of my background. I direct the Lockheed Martin Mathematics and Science Academy. I run the PhD program in special ed, and I direct the Center for Research in Education, Simulation, and Technology. But most importantly, I'm a parent of a young adult with a learning disability and Tourette's who has a college degree and a job, my most important accomplishment to this point in my life. But beyond the comments from the panel, I'll also be reflecting on the work that we did from an AERA-funded project led by Dr. Marcia Rock at UNC Greensboro, where my role was to look outside the world of education to see what was happening to recruit, attract, and retain teachers. So I'd like to frame my comments today in somewhat of a strange way. And I want you to recall the last time you went on a trip and you spun one of those small little machines and said, I wonder which one of those magnets I should buy. You probably bought the magnet, you brought it home, and as you got close to the refrigerator, it attracted. Well, today we're talking about attracting teachers. And in case you didn't know, magnets are atoms that are spinning in the same direction but have polarity. And they're aligned at the same pole, but there's also these arcs in the atom or in a magnet that doesn't have any ability to attract. What I think we need is to energize the electrical current of our field and sharing stories of our great teachers and their accomplishments, as noted by Dan, within our local community, and with a personalized approach, as articulated so wonderfully by Dana. Dana also reminded us we need to constantly align and polarize our message as the profession evolves and changes because generations change. Our message may need to change. For example, this generation, the millennials, are the most educated according to the Pew Trust poll, but they're also looking for passion. While the upcoming generation, Generation Z, loves video games more than movies, TV, or books, and at the same time, we need to attract them where they are. For example, Boynton in 2018, he used online games to attract middle schoolers to STEM careers by exposing them to the fun and the passion and the wonderful aspects of those careers. I wonder if we need some games to attract teachers, as Dan reminded us early on in middle school. Yet Dell's research on Generation Z shows they're highly motivated by social issues and making a difference. They show that 38% of them want to work for socially responsible organizations. And are you ready? 45% want work that has meaning and purpose beyond getting paid. Started thinking about that and I was like, all right, millennials, Generation Z, we're ready for you. We have the job. We have the job with purpose and passion. Sounds like you should be a special education teacher to me. They stand ready to read our positive online reviews, to play our positive games, yet we need to polarize our message and deliver it at a level at the community, state, and our nation, so these generations want to be a part of what we know is fabulous, being a special education teacher. We have just the profession to attract them, like this magnet to go on the refrigerator, but do we have the branding, the message, the polarization, and the magnetism to attract them? Dan's point of grow your own educators who are durable and built to last, I think about his point that we must attract people where they are. And remember, Lori shared with us, she started very early in this field because she was attracted to make a difference for students with disabilities. Roy went on to remind us, as educators, we cannot discourage, but we must polarize our positive message. If you look in the field of advertising, one good review gets you 2 new customers. 2 reviews get 4. Think about what 100 positive messages about our field could do to attract more people into teaching. So as Dan tells us, we have to attract the right people. We have to do it early, but I love Dan's statement. We need people to fall in love with teaching. Remember, service professions are about passion for impact. Generation Z and the millennials stand ready if we get our message right. And Roy reminds us, many of us remember the days that we need to return to teaching as a noble profession. Dana went on to remind us that much of our para workforce looks much like our students, and we need to elevate those teachers to attract a diverse workforce. So they need a pathway to move into our profession. The strength of the attraction of a magnet is when it meets the right alloy and the atoms are saturated in a positive direction. We need the right message. We need the right alloys, branding, partnerships, funding, pay, prestige, and as Dana reminded us, onboarding. Just attracting somebody without making sure they get mentoring and support in that beginning role as a teacher means we're going to continue to have turnover. So we have to attract all generations through positive stories. We need to elevate our profession, much like what we learned from the wonderful piece provided today by Anne on the evolution and elevation of the role of the chef. I recently had a privilege to go to an unnamed famous restaurant with an unnamed celebrity that was a part of an unnamed TV show. Again, don't want to give any advertisement here, but here's what's interesting. As I was at that restaurant having a meal, I was watching the chefs, and they had perfected their skills, much like the great teachers we see in classrooms today. But here's what's interesting. Each of the chefs wore different colors based on their level of proficiency. But I saw pride at every level. But the top one, the highest ranking chef, not only prepared an amazing meal, they were brought to our table not only to honor them, but to honor the food that we had just partaken in and their amazing craft. Much like a great teacher, this chef was humbled to have met us, but we were equally humbled to be a part of their craft. How do we do that for teachers? How do we create that magnetic force field between the community and the teacher? How do we show the learning that teachers serve, the dedication, the ranking of our top teachers, beyond maybe the novel teacher of the year, teacher of the week, teacher of the month, known in the school? But how do we make it more across the country? We seem to locally celebrate teachers, but we have not yet, in my opinion, polarized our message, our profession, much like I saw from those chefs. We hear people talk about their favorite teacher, but we don't have a large restaurant review of 5-star teachers or a top designation of a Michelin chef in our profession to attract magnetically the talent we know that is out there. Also remember, the top chef doesn't leave the classroom for a higher calling or a more honorable job or pay. They don't become the concierge or the head waiter. They continue to cook and craft. Yet in our profession, we seem confused. Someone like me or an administrator or curriculum specialist is given more funding and more money to entice our top chefs to leave. How do we magnetize teachers to stay in the most important role we have in school of teaching by creating a ladder of status like Anne taught us about for chefs, making their value so great they would never want to leave the classroom? Dana also reminds us that teachers need to be a part of both the selection and the onboarding process. Yet how do we ensure that that message to our new employees is always positive? We want to make sure every piece of our brand is like a good restaurant review. No one goes to a restaurant with bad reviews. If I say, hey, would you like to come eat with me? There's some really bad food and I think it's going out of business. No one shows up. Yet schools can't go out of business. Kids and families need us, but through a positive message of high quality chefs delivering the best education. Oh, I meant teachers delivering the best education possible. That's the menu we need to be delivering. Similar to the work that I did for AERA Symposium, I started looking at shortages in other fields, and I found many lessons in nursing, STEM careers, welding has a huge shortage, and many other fields. But one that keeps resonating with me is the one in nursing. People in nursing don't call someone a nurse if they're not a nurse. If you go into a hospital and somebody says they're an LPN, we know they're moving towards or on the pathway to possibly being a nurse. If someone's a nurse, we know what they're doing. If they're a nurse practitioner, if they're an MD. Yet in our schools, I think one of the mistakes we've made in attraction is if somebody walks in the door, we give them the title of teacher. And I think we're confused. Just because I walked in the door and was hired, maybe I'm not ready to be that master teacher, that master chef. And I think we need a designation of ladders to show, just like a nurse, we know what their role is. We need a positive, polarized message to help everyone understand a great qualified teacher versus teacher in training versus alternative cert versus somebody who's learning the skill as we go. We need to be like magnets to attract more teachers. What I loved about this panel today is that it shows us the pieces of positive polarization. If you put the 3 messages together, we have the answer to have the right magnetization. Dan reminded us to start early. Roy reminded us that we have to involve all stakeholders. We got to recruit culturally underrepresented, diverse applicants. And Dana said once we get them, we have to mentor them and make sure they're successful. And we know that positive message has a spiral up effect. Roy then continued to remind us we need all stakeholders, including teachers who reflect, I loved this statement, the diversity of our students in their community. He noted if we coalesce around what is good within and across local, state, and national levels, we have a movement. We see teachers like that story Anne shared with us about what's occurred with chefs. And in talking about the evolution of chefs taught us a lot about changing the perception. And here's an example from my life that I thought might resonate with you about how we need to polarize. So I don't know about you, but growing up, if I was sitting at the table and someone said, Lisa, we're going to have chocolate, my magnets would have said exactly that. Yay. But can you imagine, as you're sitting at the table, somebody says, oh, I've replaced your chocolate with Brussels sprouts. I would have been horrified. No offense, but green vegetables aren't my favorite. But somehow today, chefs have magnetized us to be attracted to Brussels sprouts. If you haven't tried them lately, they're the #1 seller on menus, and chefs have learned to add honey and raisins and Parmesan and butter, all the things we like, to move Brussels sprouts from repulsion to attraction. And hence, today, I have to say I love Brussels sprouts, but here's what we know. Brussels sprouts now have more value because the messaging has changed. We know the value of teachers is priceless, but our messaging and branding seems confused. We need to move from repulsion to attraction, but this outcome cannot happen without attracting the right people. No one's repulsed by a great teacher, but our message is not clear enough about a great teacher. And as Director Vanderplug suggested, collaboration is the key. She also asked a great question. Who needs to be at the table to recruit? And I love the panel reminded us that attraction needs to be positive and it needs to focus on community, local organizations, school boards, leaders, administrators, politicians, universities, and most importantly, children with disabilities and their family. And yet Roy reminds us that we have to polarize everyone to get rave restaurant reviews, to create the magnetic force to attract the positive and to attract the positive range of people who'd like to teach. So I decided to give you a list of ideas to potentially polarize the field that emerged from both the panel's discussion and my reading. So here's the first two, branding and having a message. We need the power of branding our great teachers. Their stories have to be louder than any negative story that ever shows up in the press. They should happen so often that we definitely want to eat at their school and be a part of their community. And our message has to be aligned with future generations. If that generation is doing gaming, social media, and other emerging technologies, we have to stand ready to attract. Two other areas to think about is onboarding and imaging. We need to be sure that it's not HR that hires a teacher. We need a teacher, a great teacher with a positive message standing there and say, come, be a part of me, be a part of this great school. And we need an image that our field is a field of celebration and not of challenges. We also need to give teachers autonomy. As I read the research from Silicon Valley, it was really clear that autonomy is the #1 thing that has gotten people to come and stay. Those companies compete for each other, but many of those companies give people, are you ready, 20% of their day to do as they please. As I think about that, as a teacher, the thought of me being able to do what I do and the flexibility to do it is powerful. We also need more flexible structures. What about a husband and wife being hired and let them decide when they work during the week? How about job sharing? How about taking our retirees, which many professions do, and say, don't retire. Stay with us one day a week and keep teaching new people how to cook. Maybe take over a classroom so there is more flexibility and autonomy. We also need a pay structure that celebrates teachers, and we need to celebrate those teachers who are flexible and think outside the box. And then my last tips come from my reflection on Anne's discussion. Anne reminded us of what we need. Like chefs, we need teachers in front of consumers. We need to bring them to the table and show everybody this is what they made. This is the kid they created. Our stories have to be stronger. She also reminded us we may need boot camps for teachers to shape policy and change. And she reminded us to retain and attract. We need to elevate cohorts of experts to show the field, polarize our message, and shape our brand. So what is the role of every citizen in polarizing and attracting great teachers? Well, you do this every time when you go to a restaurant. You talk to others about what a great chef, you provide an online review, you might even leave a great tip and talk about the great meal and service. But I wonder how we do the same locally and nationally to elevate great teachers through pay, through tips. But I think it's polarizing our message along with those strategies in our community, attracting the brand of teachers who invest in their lives and our children. Remember, teaching is not simple. It's not cooking a meal, ordering a meal, consuming it, enjoying, providing a tip, and leaving. This profession, as Roy said, is noble, important, and critical to our society and culture. Yet sometimes we do more to celebrate a restaurant when we eat than we do to magnetize our profession to attract the right people. So the next time you leave a tip on the table, ask yourself, what did you do today to make a positive comment about your school, your teacher, or to attract others to the profession like you will this restaurant? How can each of us influence the positive attraction to teaching on a daily basis? So I include one comment and an image, simply by saying each of us has a role in elevating this noble profession by not saying, why would you want to be a teacher? Instead of saying, of course you want to be a teacher. And by the way, you really want to be a special education teacher. We need to use our spheres of influence with local leadership, politicians, school boards, community members to elevate teaching, especially teaching students with disabilities. We need people to see their role not as helping those children. Instead, we need them to see a future where the neurodiversity of people with disabilities have helped us solve problems, made buildings accessible, made our technology do things we didn't even know because they needed it. They contribute in our world to make it a better place to live, work, and reside. That's what we need to attract people to do in teaching, because we all know their success is grounded in the support of their families and the great teachers like my own son had, who we need to make sure we continue to attract to this profession. So I end by first saying thank you and by sharing my last little bit of a positive story. And this is my favorite image. This is an image of our Lockheed Martin Mathematics and Science Academy program in collaboration with Orange County Public Schools and the Orange County Public School Board. So university, corporations, school board, leadership, and most importantly, teachers. We currently have 125 teachers in Title I schools who are attracted by really strong pay to go to these schools and are staying because the district and Lockheed Martin are funding their master's degree to make them teacher leaders in math and science. So I had to end with my own positive polarized review of what we can all do to share our stories in the field. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lisa. Wow, what a great start to our Summit series. I feel inspired, motivated, and proud to be part of this profession. Anne, Roy, Dan, Dana, and Lisa, thank you for sharing your expertise, experiences, and passion. When conceiving of this summit, we wanted to focus on scaling up innovative approaches, reconceptualizing our historical approaches, and exploring uncharted possibilities. You all contributed to a successful first day and brought the how-to to our vision of improving our ability to attract teachers to the profession and improve our efforts to celebrate the profession. In my opening remarks, I talked about encouraging teachers to find and encourage students in their classrooms to join the profession. But actually, that is a challenge that needs to be issued to a much wider audience, to include schools, organizations, churches, clubs, and communities, to find and support young and old, those just entering the workforce or looking for a change in careers, to join the noble profession of teaching. To repeat Lisa's closing comment, because of course you want to be a teacher. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you will come back tomorrow when we explore improving preparation. You can register at OSEP Ideas That Work, and within the next week, a recording of today's event, along with the new web resources, will also be on that site. Thank you for attending.